Give it up for dinner. Give it up for breakfast. Give it up for snacks. Wow, snacking number. Give it up for like a second dinner that you're like, I shouldn't be having this, but you still eat it. Does anyone have granola bars next to their bed like me, just in case you get really hungry at night? Anyone? Anyone here? Thank you. One person. You should try it. Nightstands are just another snack drawer. If that's one takeaway from today, when you go home and your friends and family are like, what did you learn? Be like, something about snacks should be everywhere. I'm so happy to be here and introducing the next people, the next panel. I want to take one brief moment. There's going to be two things happening. One is reflecting today. We've talked a lot about amazing individuals, amazing organizations, a lot of heroes. And something that's been really helpful to me is we've also talked a lot about villains. I don't know for you, but for me, it's like really, it's helpful to know that there's villains in the climate change fight. You know what I mean? Like it's not like it's like real, like it's like oil and gas. Like it's not like a Pixar movie where you're like, the villain is loneliness. Like it's real villains, and that is helpful. And I think we want to lead into that. I think like when I like get a straw with my iced coffee, I just want someone in a corner with like a fake mustache being like, yes, perfect. And that's it. When we like elect politicians that don't just be like, hey, everything's going according to plan. So we're gonna practice, okay? I want you to meet the people around you. So we're gonna practice this. So we're gonna do a smile competition. Let me tell you what it is, okay? Let me tell you what it is before you go, I'm already out. And remember, I'm on your team, okay? Team snacks. Here's what's gonna happen. In a little bit, you can just turn, whatever is helpful, whatever is best, you're gonna find a partner. And you and your partner are going to be in a competition to see who can smile the fastest, the most amount of time in 10 seconds. I'll demonstrate, okay? I'll count down from 10. So I'll go 10, 9, 8, and you're going to go full smile, full no smile. Full smile, really, really get into it. Does that make sense? You have to do it too, or else it's embarrassing. Can you imagine if I was like, let's do it, and everyone stayed put? Do you imagine how I would feel? I would leave town. So you're gonna find a partner, hopefully someone you don't know. Hey, introduce yourself, and then you'll go, I can't believe he's making me do this. Throw me under the bus, that's okay. And then look at each other's eyes and go like, and do a smile competition. Thank you so much, people. Smiling, don't love the person saying no. In the front row, it's my mom. No, they are watching at home. Hola, mami. And dad, y papo. Sorry. Okay, ready? You've got, let's say, 15 seconds to find a partner, and then I'll count down from 10. Whatever's easy. If you see someone just sitting alone, maybe consider going up to them. All right, find a partner. You got 15 seconds. Let's do this. If you need a partner, let someone know. Perfect. Remember, throw me under the bus. Throw me under the bus. Oh, no, I'll let you know when we start. No, very good question. All right, are you ready? The smile competition begins. You keep track. You count for your smiles versus your partner's smiles. We'll see who's the fastest smiler in the room. The competition begins in 3, 2, 1, go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, tell your partner, let's talk about this later. And we'll come back up front. Did anyone get more than 15 smiles in 10 seconds? Anyone more than 15? Wow, smile prodigy over here. America's Got Talent producers, are you in the room? Anyone get over 20 smiles? All right, 15, yeah, I think you won. Now that we've practiced emoting, we've practiced sharing our emotions with each other, I'm so excited to bring on the next panelists, the next organization, Probable Futures. They're going to be talking about Probable Futures. And they have two very, very special guests. I'm out of breath, and all I did was count to 10. Whew, all right, let's do this. So please welcome to the stage from Probable Futures, Spencer and Alison.
Thank you, Esteban. My name is Spencer Glendon. I use he, him pronouns. I'm wearing green trousers, a shirt that looks like a tablecloth that's blue and white, a blue blazer, and brown glasses. And someone told me today I look like a down market Jeff Goldblum. I'm here with my colleague Alison, and we have some special guests to help you get oriented to the changed climate we already live in and the changing climate that is coming our way. And we are not climate scientists, but we have spent an enormous amount of time with climate science, with climate scientists coming from different specialties, different parts of life. And our ambition is to build bridges between the science community and all aspects of culture. And to build those bridges, we've done a lot of work in design with artists and other people to make that bridge from science over to culture, but we need people on the other end of the bridge. And so we've got two people joining us today. They are Leah and Esteban, because what you need when you're building infrastructure are comedians to help you with the second part of the bridge building. So Leah and Esteban, Leah Bonnema, introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for having us. Our mics are on the other side. We're delighted to be here. I'm she, her. I have an incredibly large amount of hair, and I'm wearing all black because I just moved here from New York, and I cannot let go of my anxiety.
That's really good. I'm Esteban. I made you all smile, and for that I apologize. My name is Esteban, he, him. I'm wearing a baby blue outfit that I'm pretty self-conscious about. It might be too much blue.
It looks great. It looks great.
And I've been asking everyone if I look good, and everyone's looked away. So that's me.
And I'm sorry, I should have given Alison, I'm a little blinded by the lights and the whole setting and the face mic, but I should have given Alison time to introduce herself.
Alison Smart, nice to meet you, everyone. I'm the executive director of Probable Futures. She, her pronouns, and I am wearing a camel-colored suit that I'm really feeling today.
And do you have the clicker?
I am going to get the clicker.
So we're going to bring your eyes mostly up to the screen. And
so we need to switch to,
the
slideshow.
This dynamic slide. Here, I'll do this part.
Okay.
So, as we said, our organization, our initiative is called Probable Futures. And what that's about, dramatic.
Very probable.
We actually made all of our work accessible to colorblind people, which is true. Well, let's get started talking about, we have a limited amount of time, so let's get started talking about Yep, that's the one. Yep. So I have a background in engineering. Which is true. I grew up outside of Detroit, obsessed in the 70s and 80s with why really bad things happened to large groups of people while other people prospered. In some sense, you could ask the question I was asking was, why is it gloomy in some places and sunny in other places? And so I was actually first an engineer, and then I worked as a researcher in economics, economic history, economic development, and in investing. And I came to think a lot about how it is that societies prospered, and in particular, what made things cluster in certain places. And so one of the questions I have for our counterparts here, our partners here, is why do you think the movie industry is in Hollywood?
So it's why the movie industry settled in LA.
Settled in Hollywood, settled in LA. Why is it in LA? Why did the movie industry settle here?
You. I would say Runyon Canyon, all the hotties.
Is it the hotties?
So hotties a good guess.
By hotties, I mean cute dogs.
Yeah,
right?
To be clear.
Oh, look at this.
Hey. What if it just is a slide that says the hotties?
Yeah.
I'll be driving from over here.
All right.
Okay.
So
now I'm the engineer.
The answer actually is probably going to surprise you. It's a lack of lawyers.
Oh, that makes sense.
So if you
get
advance
that.
the slide. So the movie industry should have been in New York. There were writers, there were theaters, there were actors, there were executives, there were people with money. But there was one other thing, which is there were people like Thomas Edison pictured here who wanted to enforce intellectual property like nobody's business. And nobody's business is real because they wanted to charge so much for a movie industry equipment, even though there was not a movie business yet. It turned out in California, no one cared about IP. I know that seems very hard to believe now, but no one cared about IP, so you could make knockoff projectors, you could just abscond with some land, make some movies. The second reason, though, is why we're here, which is weather. And the weather here is not just nice. It's very specific. It's a very specific local climate. It's warm, but not too hot. It's dry, but it's not a desert. It's actually in between. It's a microclimate that's very specific and did a very specific set of things, one of which is that if it's always 70 degrees, you can look like you're anywhere else in the world. You can wear suits, you can wear winter clothes part of the time. It's very flexible. It's very narrow. If you go too far east, you're in the desert. Too far west, you're in the ocean. And so we're here to ask a question that we think will be interesting to you, which is, what will climate change mean for Hollywood?
So when I first started working on climate change almost 9 years ago, I had a lot of questions like these. And I imagine questions like these and other practical questions are on the minds of all of you in the room. I did not come from a background in climate science. I actually came from a background in the arts. I was working in museums for a decade before I started working on climate science, helping experts translate their work, translate academic material for general audiences. And so when I started working on climate change, I thought to myself, well, what will climate change actually be like and feel like in different places around the world and in different communities, whether that community was an industry or a neighborhood or a city or a business. And so I thought that I could use my experience in the arts and help climate scientists translate their work so that it was resonant for outsiders like me, and so it could answer questions like these.
All right. I got it?
All right, because I was used to seeing, let me stand closer to, so I was used to seeing climate science that looked like this, and like this, and like this. Leah and Esteban, how do you feel about this?
Yeah, this actually makes perfect sense to me.
Yes.
This looks like the notes. I journal every morning, and it looks very much like this.
No, I totally get it. It's stuff, and
Right.
when the stuff happens, it's really hard on you.
That's a super good point about the stuff.
Yeah. Right. So it makes it seem really complex, right? And not very practical. It doesn't feel useful, and it certainly doesn't send the signal that it's for me as a non-scientist. But the more that I worked with climate scientists, the more that I realized that the most useful aspects of climate science are really quite clarifying and intuitive. And this is one of the most clarifying things that I learned from climate scientists. So what we're looking at here is a gigantic graph of the history of the global average temperature of the Earth. So this graph starts at the dawn of civilization about 12,000 years ago. And so for each of these 12,000 years, it's showing the global average temperature for that year as compared to the late 19th century. So the way to understand this graph is that the closer the data point is to 0, the more stable the global average temperature was. And so what you see here is a flat line. The global average temperature barely even fluctuated a degree. So what we have here is climate stability for the past 12,000 years.
Which I think looks amazing, because that's what my therapist tells me is my goal with my mood swings, just keeping it in the middle instead of overreacting, underreacting, overreacting.
Yeah. Keep it stable. So this shed light on something that scientists and anthropologists actually didn't really know about an aspect of human history. So we know that about 12,000 years ago, communities in different parts of the world, completely disconnected, all settled around the same time. They didn't know why, but we did know that communities have cultures, and those cultures formalized into governments over time, and those governments built infrastructure like roads and bridges to laws and policies that helped large groups of people coordinate. And that literally and figuratively paved the way for industry until eventually we had this super complex society that we have today, which has specializations like investing and production companies and comedians and film.
So comedians is at the very top?
Actually, comedians were around long before finance. So before 12,000 years ago, before 9500 BCE, humans, all of us humans, were mobile. Why is that? Well, again, climate science can help us find the answer. So we're extending this graph a little bit farther, and we know that our first ancestors emerged in Africa around 200,000 years ago. And for 190,000 years, all humans were nomadic, hunting, gathering species. And looking at this chart gives us an understanding for why. The climate changed dramatically in those 190,000 years, and a changing climate at this magnitude just wasn't conducive to settling into one place. What was conducive for it was this green line over here. Climate stability allowed us to settle, to stay in one place, to know that the nice places were going to stay nice. It allowed us to practice agriculture and understand what flora and fauna would flourish in particular places. So now we know that a stable climate was actually the foundation for all of civilization.
I love the person who pitched this and was like, hey, you know how we canceled that meeting because the climate was bad? What if we did that for thousands of years? This is incredible. I love our IMAX view, too. We're really...
Right in here with the limes. We're right in with the lime slices.
It's the best way to show information is lime slices.
Limeade.
Lime wire?
Lime light.
Limes. Thank you.
Seems that the limes are also going to Nicole, my therapist. Stability. Holds us up.
Right. Also good in a drink, so thank you, limes. All right, Spencer.
So you learned how stability enabled enabled planning. And so stability was the foundation of civilization. But why did we thrive so much? Why were we this dominant species thereafter? Well, the answer is that the climate wasn't just stable, it was perfect for humans. So over time, we can look back and see where people lived in different eras, going back thousands and thousands of years. And for the most part, people clustered in places where the weather was mild. In fact, we call that land temperate, those climates temperate. So there are lots of temperate spaces around the world. The other is that there were stable seasonal patterns. So people who lived outside of temperate places, maybe places that were quite hot, or maybe places that actually had rain come only a couple months of the year, if that rain came at the same time predictably every year, and it fell with the same intensity, then you could plan. And so you see that humans figured out how to live even in challenging environments so long as they remain predictable. But the last thing is, we're all the same temperature. If you want to get one thing that everyone has in common, we are all the same body temperature. And what this means is we also have the same limits.
Feels like politicians should say that. Like the one thing we have in common is we are all the same temperature.
And why does that temperature matter? Because well, this map should make it obvious, right? This map is obvious to you. It's a big gray map. And at the top left there is a term I'm sure you're all familiar with, which is the wet bulb temperature.
Wet
That
bulb.
Sounds sexual.
Yeah.
I
Get
don't know
into
what
it.
that is, but I think we want it. Am I right?
Wet bulb?
It's useful. It's going to be a little less sexy than you want it to be, but it is useful. So I'm going to back up and explain it. We are all warm-blooded. What this means is we generate heat. We actually need the room, the area around us to offload heat. So in this room, where it's almost certainly 72 degrees, the air does that work for us, takes off this heat. But if it were warmer, we would need to do more work. In fact, we would sweat. And that sweating would cause evaporation, and then the air would take away the heat for us. But above a certain level, if the air is too warm and or too humid, we don't function. We don't offload that heat. If the air can't cool us down, bad things happen. And that measurement of how much the air can cool us down is wet bulb temperature.
Oh, danger, death. Not sexy at all. My bad.
That's okay. It's helpful to frame what are the limits. And we have real limits. And we were not tested with those limits. The limits are that above 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees C and 100% humidity, any person, no matter how much you're like a Helmsworth or whatever, you can't make it. At 75% humidity and 102 degrees, it's the same effect. At 50% humidity and 112 degrees, and finally at 132 and 25. What you see is it's a combination of heat and humidity. At that temperature, everybody's body would overheat.
Have they thought about why they named it so whimsically and it's so horrifying?
So a lot of climate science, as Alison and I have learned, turns out to be quite intuitive. A wet bulb temperature is measured by taking a thermometer, wrapping it in a wet cloth, and waving it in the air. That's how you do it.
Wow.
And what happens is if it's dry air, the moisture on the cloth will evaporate and cool the thermometer. At 100% humidity, you wave it around, it's the same temperature as the outside air. That's why 35 and 100% is 35. And so it's just the measurement of how much evaporation can cool you down. And this is going to become part of our lexicon. This is going to be a word that's on the news. This is going to be a word that's in school reports. And so now let's go back to the map. This is a map from probablefutures.org, and it's a map of the number of days per year that would be above that temperature, and gray means 0. And the purple caret you see at the top says 0.5 degrees C. That indicates the level of warming of this map. That's 1971 to 2000, the late 20th century. And in the late 20th century, this temperature did not happen anywhere on the planet, basically. We never faced that limit. That's not the death limit, that's the danger limit. No one experienced that level of warming. And so now we know there are actually 3 eras from a human-centric perspective. Back here, where there were dinosaurs on Earth, it was just too hot for humans. That's why there were no big mammals. That's why there were big lizards. What's not true about Jurassic Park, what's science fiction-y most about Jurassic Park, is that the humans and the dinosaurs are not, the humans aren't expiring with sweat. Sam Neill somehow doesn't sweat. Then there's a period where it's too unstable for us to be settled. And then there's the green. And we're now meeting because we are leaving the green. At 1.2 degrees C, we are outside the green band. And so it's not just about warmer temperatures, it's about instability. And so we go back to those slices of limes. If the bottom is tippy and fractured, what's going to happen to the rest? And so this is about, what we're trying to help people do is keep civilization connected, strong, so that we can do the hard work of stabilizing climate. What does this mean? It's actually very practical. This building was built for a certain range of temperatures. So was the road outside, so were the storm sewers. It's banal. All this stuff, what you eat, how you recreate, the architecture, what you wear, all of this was built assuming a stable climate, and it's all changing. You can tell a story about an urban planner, about someone who sells mortgages, about someone who teaches gym. They all have assumptions that they're going to have to re-evaluate about how the climate is changing. And so what that means is we're going to have to tie the society together. A lot of work needs to be done at the bottom to stop the emissions of fossil fuels, but work needs to be done everywhere so that society can be resilient. When the tipping happens, we don't all fall apart. And so let's prepare. Alison?
All right. So you've seen a blank map so far, but we're actually going to start to look at some maps with some data in it. So let's get right into it. We're going to come back to that concept of wet bulb temperature and look at a little bit of a lower threshold. So this is 82 degrees Fahrenheit wet bulb. I'll orient you to the maps here because we're going to look at a bunch of them. So we're starting with a past climate, as Spencer mentioned. From 1971 to 2000, the global average temperature had already warmed a half a degree Celsius beyond pre-industrial temperatures. 1 degree of warming is about where we are today. The Earth has warmed about 1.2 degrees beyond pre-industrial temperatures. 1.5 degrees is coming very soon. So the way that we think about these maps is that some of these maps are practical and meant for planning this, the world that we are living in and that we are likely to be living in very soon. 2, 2.5, and 3, those worlds are still choices. And we need to understand what those choices look like so that we know what we're avoiding and are really motivated to avoid those futures. So we're looking at the number of days above 82 degrees Fahrenheit in an average year in a past climate. And you can see it's still mostly gray. But the places that do experience these days are green, something like 1 to 3 days a year. The blues are up to 2 weeks, and the pinks and reds are over 2 weeks or a month. So really still very few places. So I'm going to advance to 1 degree of warming here. We're already seeing a very big difference. So we're seeing big changes in the tropics. We're seeing changes in North America, in China. These are big changes just for a half a degree of warming. Now advance through 1.5, 2, 2.5, and 3. This is a massively different world of heat and humidity that we are dealing with here, or if we get to 3 degrees Celsius. This is we start with this because it's so fundamental to the human body, but it's also one of the things that changes the most significantly and gets very little attention when we think about climate impacts. And so why is that? Why does it change so significantly? Well, this is the second most clarifying thing that I learned from climate scientists, and that's that warmer air holds more moisture. This concept, if you understand this concept, you're going to understand 90% of the physical climate impacts that we're likely to experience. So, in fact, for every 1 degree Celsius warmer the air is, it can hold 7% more moisture. This is a super simple concept with a very complicated name. It's called the Clausius-Clapeyron equation.
Love it. Should we have an intervention with scientists about names? Because wet bulb is terrifying, and it feels like just like a wet bulb.
Clausius seems like an old man in a book. We are, Clausius said.
Yeah, Clausius said. And then it's also sad. Someone talk to scientists. Let's form a naming committee.
Right. So what this means in the aggregate is the atmosphere is able to hold more moisture. It's able to draw more moisture from the land through evaporation, creating elongated periods of dry. And then when it does come down, it comes down in larger quantities than it used to. A warmer world means there's simply less mild weather. There are fewer normal temperate days. So let's explore drought. We're looking at a map that depicts the likelihood for a 12-month period of extreme drought. The definition for extreme drought is a drought that happens 5% of the time in any given place. Okay, so it's like a once-in-a-generation event. And it's important to understand that drought is different in different places. So the 5% drought in Los Angeles is going to look very different than the 5% chance drought in Brasilia and the 5% drought in Delhi. This map takes that into consideration. And so In this past climate, we have everywhere in the world, extreme drought is a 5% chance event. Moving to 1 degree of warming, we see many places in the world that move into this 11 to 20% category. And these projections have really panned out. They're highlighting a lot of the places that are already experiencing extreme dryness. Moving forward from 1.5 to 2.5 and 3. Almost everywhere in the world, that 5% chance is much more likely. And the places that fall in the bright orange or in the dark red category, now it's something like a 1 in 2 year event. It's something that happens most of the time rather than being a once in a generation event. And what that means is that it's not really drought any longer. Those places have a new climate, and we need new language and new ways to think about living in those climates. Then let's look at the flip side. So this is a map of a big storm, what a lot of scientists and meteorologists somewhat confusingly call a 1 in 100 year storm. It really just means a chance with a storm with a 1% chance of happening. And so already at 1 degree of warming, most places in the world are seeing that old 1 in 100 year storm being twice as likely. And I'll advance through the warming scenarios here. The darker the blue, the more frequently that storm will show up. You can see really dark colors up in the Arctic, and in typically cold places, that comes back to that Clausius-Clapeyron equation. So those places tended to, they were cold places, they had dry air because the air couldn't hold much moisture. But as it gets warmer in the Arctic, there will be bigger storms there. So I can totally understand if you're like, I don't like these maps, get this lady off stage. Where does this data even come from? Get your data out of here. But it's actually not our data. It is the world's data. It belongs to all of us. So where does it come from? Universities and research labs have been collaborating for decades to build these climate models. But only really a small slice of the climate science community even knows how to, before Probable Futures, knew how to access and use those models. And in addition, when we started Probable Futures, there was a industry of climate intelligence service providers who were using their know-how to sell this data for a fee. We thought that every community in the world, particularly the ones on the front lines, the ones that are most vulnerable to climate change, have a right to access this data, to know what their futures might be, to plan, to advocate. And so we needed to get this data out of IPCC reports and out of scientific journals into the hands of the people that can use them all around the world, and then build literacy so that those communities are empowered to use this information. And that was the inspiration behind Probable Futures. So let's start to do a little of that now. Let's look at some specific places and look at what a 1.5 degree world looks like. I know that this is a difficult thing to talk about. We all want to stay under 1.5 degrees. The scientific reality is that the probability of that is minuscule, and even if we are able to control global warming to 1.5 degrees, we're still likely to live in a world that is 1.5 degrees of warming. And so not planning for it, not thinking about it would be unrealistic, it would be irresponsible, and it's not going to be a world where we live well if we don't really start thinking about it and planning. And so I have good news and bad news when it comes to 1.5 degrees. This is often the way that we hear climate change portrayed, right? Like everything is going to be solved, there's going to be continued stability with electric cars, or it's perpetual apocalypse. Climate change is going to be...
Can we just choose one and then call it?
Right.
And then...
That'd be great.
One, yeah.
Right. So what we need to do is really engage with the probable futures in between. Spencer?
Thank you. So what we're going to do now is show how we built this tool to allow people to look at where they live, or a place they care about, or a place that matters to an animal they care about, or a place that's far away that somehow they feel an attachment to. And so we've got two great people helping us here. Leah is from Maine. Esteban, I'll keep it a secret where Esteban is from. He's got a more...
I'll never tell.
Not because he is, the FBI's looking for him, but
That's right. And so, Leah, you're from Maine.
I am.
Can you tell me a little bit about what winter's like in Maine?
I'm from Northwest, I'm a rural. So if you have problems with moose, you let me know. I'll tell you how to handle it. So winters were heavy snow. My family had wood heat, so that means if you're 5 feet away, you're freezing. I would say cold, dark, and then more dark.
So my understanding is that like Rumford here was the big city. The Rumford folks look down on your Bethel folks.
Well, I would say that Bethel's a little more fancy, and Rumford was the big city. They have a Walmart and a light. They have a flashing light. So
and this is, I mean, I'm glad to do this, and I'm glad to have help with this. But this is actually the kind of thing we need to talk about at this level of specificity. So I didn't know exactly where Leah was from, so we chose a different place. We chose Augusta. And what you can do on Probable Futures, all by yourself, probablefutures.org, zoom in, find your place, click on it, and it will show you things like the number of frost nights in an average year. But not just in an average year, this is a range. So average is in the middle, it says 142. The 5th percentile was a warmer year. There were 86 nights where the temperature was below zero. And in a colder year, 188. So you see that climate is not the same every year. There are these ranges. And so were there some years that were particularly brutal and others that were, you kind of got a break?
I don't actually remember getting a break. I feel like I've gotten a break recently, but growing up, I feel no breaks. I definitely slept with a hat on.
So let's show you what's already happened between 0.5 and 1 degree C, and watch the numbers as they change. So you lose by going from 0.5 to 1. The warm year goes from 86 days to 69. So the winters can get much shorter, and we see this throughout the Northeast. Winter is about 3 weeks shorter on average. And these numbers change again as you get to 1.5. The range is still very wide. It might be 2 months, 67 days, or it might be 178, half the year basically. So this range is quite wide, but it is different and it's specific. Now, do you have any memories related to snow in particular?
I do have memories related to snow, and it's decided that my parents just got their first air conditioner in their 70s. I mean, before that we had wind, which is very popular. But we used to go out every winter and cut a tree down for Christmas, because we all Hallmark, and pull it out of the woods on the snow. And now we have to carry it out because there's no snow in the woods at Christmas.
That's right. And is that a tragic story? It's a cultural change story, but it's the kind of story people can understand and bring into their lives. And this data shows you that in an average year in Augusta, which probably didn't get as much snow as Bethel, but there were, in an average year, it would snow 32 times a year. That's the baseline there. In a snowy year, 47, and in a not so snowy year, just a couple of weeks. And you can see what happens by going from 1.5 to 1 degree C is you lose, in a warm year, they might only get 13 minus 5, sorry to make you do math, but 8 days. And if you go ahead, these numbers drop. And this is a change that's not catastrophic, but it is meaningful. But the meaning is not for me to say, it's not for climate scientists to say, it's for people who live in these places to say. And so a lot of it is about listening, equipping people in these places with information about where they live, and then listening to what they need, listening to how life will change for them. And one of the ways things are changing in Maine is the likelihood of wildfire. Because remember, Alison talked about things getting drier, but they can also get wetter. So you have times when there's a lot of growth and then times when there's dryness. And what you see is that there's been an increase in the number of days where wildfire is likely. But if we go to 1.5 degrees, it's a big change southwest of there. There's still change in Augusta, but there's a big change here. And so the kind of awareness that was useful in the West, where there were more common wildfires, is now going to be useful in new places. So now, Esteban, do you have an attachment to Puerto Rico?
Yeah, my family's Colombian, but we lived Colombianos! Hey! That's so great. We're not going to look at it. I just need to tell you. We're looking, but I lived for a few years in Puerto Rico, mostly so my parents wanted me to be a Bad Bunny fan, and that's.
And was that successful?
It was successful. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for asking.
So
We lived in Mayagüez, if that's helpful. My dad was both my parents were teaching at universities in Mayagüez on the west side.
And what you can see here actually is how different these different places are in terms of how often it's 90 degrees or above 90 degrees. In some places, not at all. In other places, less than a week. And in some places, as much as 8 to 30 days. But Puerto Rico is one of the places that's changing the most because the Gulf of Mexico is getting warmer very fast. And so just going from 0.5 to 1, you see a huge change in the number. And we've picked the area that includes San Juan. So to show that again, went from an average of a month, maybe it doesn't happen at all, maybe it happens 112 days. And at 1.5 degrees, it's a radical change. And this is a much wider range. And there are infrastructure issues here with electricity, with air conditioning, with irrigation. And so this is a place where there are going to be real challenges, and we're going to need to listen to the people in those places and figure out how to help them. The rich people, the rich countries, the rich communities are going to need to find ways to help people in places that have more challenges. And so we'll go one more variable here, which is wet bulb temperature. And so a high wet bulb temperature here was pretty uncommon. Nowhere here had more than 3 days on average. That's what the green and the gray means. But at 1.5 degrees C, in some places, it's more than a month on average. And in a warm year, it might be 3 or more months. This is the kind of change we need to bring in. It is sad, it is hard, but it is tractable. And it is better to know than to not know. And dry, hot days are the reciprocal of that. An increase in dry, hot days and those heavy, wet days is the kind of challenge we're going to see in these places. That's far away. LA is here. You all experienced heavy rains. Do you have any experience with heavy rains lately?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think we all did.
Boom.
So was this likely? Could you see this coming? Well, the probability of a 1 in 100-year storm didn't change much between 0 and 1 degree, see, in these maps. But as you go to 1.5, you see a change. They become twice as likely. And in some places nearby, they become much more likely. That warmer air holds more moisture, can dump it more frequently.
Everybody's dog is going to have to learn how to pee outside in the rain, which seems very not LA. My dog would
That's
like,
adaptation.
no.
For those people who want to know the difference between mitigation and adaptation, that's adaptation.
Very big adaptation.
Also, we're going to have to stop saying, we needed this every time it rains. And that's going to
No,
So why do you need it?
cultural
But have you
shift.
seen the green?
But we needed it.
But we needed it.
We needed it.
So drought is simultaneously becoming more likely in a way that I don't need to deliberate, but I want to show you that this data has already been insightful. But I want to stop on this just for a second because California provides roughly half of America's fruits and vegetables, and almost all of those fruits and vegetables are irrigated by snowmelt. So the amount of snow in the mountains determines how much we can grow greens, strawberries, alfalfa. And so changes in the number of frost nights in places near Mammoth, for example, are going to be a really big deal. And these are some pretty big changes. And so now you get a feeling for how these data can be used in different places, how they might be applied. But I want to take you someplace else, not Hollywood, but Bollywood. And Bollywood is a place where they're coming up against these limits, these physical limits. India is near those physical limits. And the changes in wet bulb temperature there are going to be dramatic. They're already dramatic. And the impacts on children, the impacts on the elderly are tremendous. And I'm going to go through these quickly. And I'm only going to go to 1.5 degrees. But I want to give you a sense of the scale and the urgency of this. This is the why. And I know people here don't really need the why. They're motivated to be here. But it's good to be concrete. We've worked a lot with psychologists to not have it be anxiety, but specific things we're worried about that we can address, that we can name. Anxiety, my therapist tells me, keeps people out of the office. Specific fears brings them in to talk about them. Naming it and having it be vivid is what we think can be helpful. And we're seeing a lot of evidence of that. We're hopeful that it's helpful to you. And so these numbers are astonishing. The intensity of rainfall. So this is the 1 in 100-year storm in Mumbai. 312 millimeters in that rainstorm. It's in one day. That's the better part of 14 inches of rain in one day. And just going from 0 to 1 degree adds, so there are 25 millimeters in an inch, adds almost 3 inches. At 1.5 degrees C, this is almost 20 inches of rain in one day to be expected in the 1 in a 100-year storm. Nobody's infrastructure is built for that, but we have to build infrastructure for it in some way. And that may not be physical, it may be social. So this is, maybe it makes more sense what we mean by tying this all together, making it able to tip, making it able to hang together. And so with that, we wanted to talk to you about imagination.
All right, so we're going to bring it home with imagination since we're in Hollywood, although this is a concept that we talk about a lot when we talk with CEOs and governors and public health officials and disaster relief organizations, and we're hopeful that this concept and this tool can be helpful for you as well, because those maps make it really clear that life in a changing climate is going to be different, but how well we live within those futures is completely up to us. We have the ability to imagine and design different futures, and those imagined futures will be much more helpful, much more useful if they are bounded by science, if they're bounded by what we know about the physical limits of this planet, and if they're bounded by what we know about how the climate is likely to change in the near future. And so let's cycle back to this binary here. And there's been a lot of conversation last night and today about how this shows up in entertainment. And I'm sure you all could tell me a lot about that, but just as an outsider, I thought it might be helpful to share some of those instances that I see of not exploring the middle, but instead staying in this binary. This is an amazing movie. I watched this movie with my 11-year-old daughter. She has impeccable taste in film, I might say. It's a present coming of age story where this young woman is thinking about her future, and there are all these considerations coming into it. Religion, her family, her friends, academics, what she wants to do with her life. But climate is nowhere to be found in that. The climate of San Francisco, the climate of New York, and as Good Energy and Dorothy Fortenberry have told us, if climate isn't in your story, it's science fiction. So it would have been really helpful, I think, for people to see other folks on screen thinking about climate change and considering it in their future, because we're all going to have to start to consider climate change when we make long-term decisions. And then Mad Max is a great example of number 2. And that's not to say that there isn't a place for apocalyptic storytelling. There absolutely is, but we could really use realistic, imaginative depictions of near futures that address how we might deal with and cope with and manage scarce natural resources, or increasingly scarce natural resources. So number 1 is no longer possible. Unfortunately, we are in a changing climate. We will continue to be for some time, but number 2 is avoidable, and it's a ways off. We don't need to spend a lot of time there. On probablefutures.org, throughout the maps, we make place-based stories of risk, resiliency, and adaptation available to help get those gears turning. So this happens to be a story of a school in Sacramento dealing with extreme heat. We have stories all over the world about, this happens to be some farmers in Africa who are using innovation to build resiliency to water scarcity. So we need to engage with these stories in between. We need to demonstrate living well in a changing climate, and we need to reconnect with the physical world. Many of us have lost that connection over time. Thankfully, not all communities have lost that connection. The previous panel was a great example of that. And so we can follow the lead of those communities and reconnect back with the physical world and with the humans around us. So let's wrap it up here. So, Spencer?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is underestimated here is how wonderful Earth will still be. So it is undoubtedly compromised by us. But this idea that we just give up, we broke it and it's over, is not productive. It remains marvelous. And one of the things that Alison and I have found is that by engaging in this work, we find the world more wondrous, we find it more interesting, we find it easier to connect with other people. We need to learn to live not just with solutions, we solve it and it goes away, but how we're going to live in this more complicated world. And we can live well within a changing climate. But what that will require is for everybody to bring climate work into their work, not to all become people who invent nuclear fusion, but whatever your work is, bring it into your lives. And so comedians are a good example.
I need to put aside my nuclear fission hobby,
Yep.
and then I'm on board.
And so there are jokes in comedy about all kinds of the facets, of other facets of life. And then there are like two people who do climate comedy. Having comedy jokes that involve these issues that we're all compromised in, we're all imperfect, can be really useful and resonant. And we're hopeful that with these tools we've made available and with the input of people like you, we can make the probable futures better in ways that we'll all feel good about. So thank you for your time and attention. Thank you, Esteban and Leah.
Thank you, Esteban. Thank you, Leah.
And if you want to reach out to us, there's an email address there, and we'd be happy to hear from you. Thanks so much.
I also know it's time, stepping out of my role, I know it's time for lunch, and lunch is ready to rock, so thank you for joining us for the first half of the day. And we'll see you back, I think, in 30 minutes? Something like that. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Hi. Hi. Oh, great. Spencer.